right, so you're finally relaxing. Maybe you're enjoying that first cup of coffee and bam, out of nowhere it hits you, that unmistakable sound. Like some kind of crazed construction crew decided 6 a.m. on a Saturday was the perfect time to start jackhammering right next to your bedroom window. But then it hits you. It isn't construction workers at all. It's
No.
even worse, isn't it? It's those feathered fiends with a taste for percussion and apparently a vendetta against your sighting.
Yep.
We're talking woodpeckers, and today we're diving into their world. You know, why they do what they do, how to deal with the aftermath, and most importantly, how to send them packing, politely, of course. And we're doing it all with the help of Woodpecker Warfare. This guide is packed with practical advice for dealing with these little drumming devils. And let's be real, it's not just about the noise, is it? We've all been there, woken up at the crack of dawn by what sounds like a miniature pile driver going to town on our homes. But this guide gets it. It's about protecting what's yours, understanding the why behind those persistent pecks.
And that's key right there, understanding their motivation. Because if we can step back from our own frustration for a moment and try to see things from the woodpecker's perspective, well, it begins to make a lot more sense.
I'm willing to try it. So let's say I wake up, I'm a woodpecker. What's the first thing on my mind? Besides finding a good drum solo, of course.
Well, you have to consider their anatomy, their beaks, their skulls. It's practically designed for this. It's evolution at its finest. These incredibly powerful neck muscles, coupled with a brain that's perfectly cushioned against impact. It's incredible, really.
Wow, I never thought about it that way. So they're hardwired for this drumming. But what's the point?
Well, it's communication.
Hmm.
Mainly, it's about establishing territory. Imagine if every time you moved, you had to put up a fence. Woodpeckers, they're claiming their space. And what better way to do that than with a percussive performance that can be heard for miles?
Okay, so it's like their version of putting up a keep out sign, only a lot louder. And speaking of loud, I've heard drumming is a big part of their mating rituals. Is that true?
Absolutely. Think of it as their love song.
Hold on. So that rapid fire drumming we hear, that's the woodpecker version of like a Barry White song.
You could say that.
I never knew woodpeckers were so romantic.
Let's just say they have their moments. But on a more serious note, this is where things can go from a funny story to a real problem for homeowners.
Yeah. Because while that drumming might be music to their ears, it can be a sign your house is about to become a lot more ventilated. And I'm not talking about extra windows.
And speaking of which, we should talk about the damage those tiny beaks can cause. People really underestimate it. They think, oh, it's just a few pecks, no big deal. But it can be a much bigger deal than you'd think. Ignoring those holes, even the little ones, it could really come back to bite you.
No kidding. The guide says that even tiny holes can really mess up your siding. Leaks, rot. It can even attract other pests.
Exactly. It's like a domino effect. First, you've got those holes, and if you don't do anything about them, they let in water and bugs. And suddenly you're dealing with way more than a woodpecker. We're talking rot, mold, even structural damage.
That's a lot to deal with just because of little drumming. So early detection, that's what's important here, right? But how can you tell if it's just a little pecking or something more serious?
You gotta know what to look for. The size of those holes, the pattern they make, it actually tells a story. Small, round holes, those are usually from feeding.
So they're like little exterminators then?
In a way, yeah. But if there weren't really any bugs there in the first place, well...
Not so helpful.
Right. Now, if you're seeing larger holes, kind of rectangular, with wood chips everywhere,
Uh-oh.
that's usually nesting. They're making a home.
So if I start seeing wood shavings, I should be worried.
It's definitely time to take a closer look, yeah. And then there's the drumming we were talking about. It doesn't usually cause as much damage, but it can still be bad news if it goes on for too long.
Makes sense. So we've talked about why they do it, the risks. Now for the big question, what can we do about it? How do we evict these unwanted tenants and do it humanely?
That's the goal. We want to coexist, not start a war. Luckily, there are a lot of good options out there. Humane options. The guide actually breaks these options down into different categories.
This is the interesting part. What categories are we talking about?
Well, first you've got your visual deterrents, things that woodpeckers don't like to look at.
Give me an example.
Reflective surfaces, like mirrors. Woodpeckers, they really rely on their vision. They're very sensitive to movement and light.
So anything that's too flashy for them.
Anything that disrupts their vision, really.
So shiny tape, things like that.
Exactly. Even old CDs hung up can work. It's all about making their favorite drumming spot a little less appealing.
Like a harmless haunted house, but for birds. Okay, I like it. What about sound? Can you use that to deter them?
Absolutely. Have you heard of ultrasonic devices?
I have, but do those actually work?
They can be really effective. You see, those devices, they emit these high-frequency sounds. We can't hear them, but birds can, and they don't like them one bit.
It's like an invisible fence, but made of sound.
That's a great way to put it.
So we've got our visual deterrents, our sonic deterrents. What else?
Well, the guide also talks about surface alterations.
Surface alterations. What does that mean?
It's exactly what it sounds like. You're changing the surface they want to peck at, making it less appealing to them.
So if they can't get to it, they'll just give up.
That's the idea.
What kind of materials are we talking about here?
Netting is a popular one. Mesh, too. You're creating a barrier between the woodpecker and your house.
That's really clever.
And then you've got your natural repellents.
Oh, yeah, I've heard of those. What's the deal with those?
Well, we talked about sight, sound, but what about taste?
You're going to make the sighting taste bad.
Pretty much. There are these taste-based deterrents, and they use natural ingredients that woodpeckers just hate.
Like what?
Garlic's a big one. Hot pepper, citrus. They really can't stand the taste.
It's like that bitter-tasting nail polish people use to stop biting their nails. So it's not about harming them. It's just, hey, this isn't a snack bar.
You got it.
All right, so we've got visual deterrents, noise deterrents, we've got netting, we've got bad-tasting stuff. What about preventing the problem in the first place? Prevention, that's the best way to win this war, right?
Absolutely. And it usually comes down to those tasty insects we keep talking about. Get rid of the food, you get rid of the woodpecker.
Right, because who sticks around when there's nothing good to eat? So we're talking pest control then, making sure those bugs aren't moving in and setting up their own buffet.
Exactly. Seal up any cracks or gaps where they might be getting in.
And what about landscaping? Does that play a role?
Oh, for sure. Some plants, they attract the kinds of bugs that woodpeckers love.
So I might need to rethink those flowers I was planning on planting.
You might want to talk to a local expert, just to be sure.
Good idea. Now, there's something else in this guide that seems a little backwards. It says here we should put up birdhouses. But wouldn't that, like, attract more woodpeckers?
I know, it seems counterintuitive.
Yeah.
But think of it this way. They want a nest.
Right.
So if you give them a place, they can do that.
They leave my siding alone.
That's the hope.
So instead of drilling holes in my house, they can move into their own little condo with, like, a nice view and everything.
Exactly.
All right, I'm on board with that. It's a win-win for sure.
Exactly.
So we've talked a lot about deterrence, prevention, but there's something else we haven't mentioned yet.
The legal side of things.
Right.
A lot of woodpecker species, they're actually protected.
So even if they're driving me crazy, I can't just...
You need to be careful. There are laws, and they can be pretty strict.
That's important to remember, because even though they can be a nuisance, they're part of the ecosystem.
Right. And they're just trying to survive, like all of us.
Okay, so for anyone listening who's dealing with a woodpecker situation right now, remember, first, don't panic. There are ways to deal with this. Learn about their behavior, try out those humane deterrents we talked about, and if you're not sure what to do, call an expert.
Absolutely. It's about finding that balance, you know?
Yeah.
Protecting our homes and appreciating the natural world.
Even when it's drumming on our siding at the crack of dawn.
Exactly.
Well, I think that about wraps it up for this deep dive. Thanks for joining us. Until next time.